When it comes to higher education, we rarely stop to ask, are grades actually a useful measure of academic success? Grades are one of the most deeply ingrained traditions in higher education. They shape admissions, scholarships, job applications, and institutional rankings. We use them as a shorthand for achievement, as a way of sorting students, and as a tool for motivation. Grades determine who excels, who struggles, who gains access to elite universities and internships, and who is left behind. They dictate scholarships, employment opportunities, and entire academic careers. But ask college students how they approach their education in a traditionally graded environment, and you'll start to notice a pattern. They choose easy A courses. They skim readings to focus only on what will be on the test. They search course reviews to figure out which professors give the highest grades with the least effort. They share files of previous exams, swap notes on which assignments can be skipped with minimal penalty, and in some cases use AI-generated responses to produce work that meets grading rubrics without true engagement. Why? Because in a traditional grading system, the goal isn't learning. The goal is getting the right grade. Unfortunately, this grade-centric behavior starts long before students arrive at college. Even in high school, students meticulously calculate the exact scores needed to maintain their grade point average, or GPA, because a single bad grade can derail scholarship opportunities and limit access to elite institutions, making students more likely to choose courses based on GPA protection rather than intellectual growth. Once in college, many continue this strategic disengagement. Some avoid electives that could broaden their skills simply because they fear a challenging professor's grading policies might hurt their overall standing. Others sidestep independent research projects, tutorials, or interdisciplinary seminars, choosing pre-structured courses where grading is predictable and straightforward. Faculty see this phenomenon firsthand. When presented with a truly open-ended and demanding assignment, students often ask, what do I need to do to get an A? It is a question that reveals just how deeply grading has shaped their mindset. Meanwhile, faculty face their own struggles with traditional grading, which limits the meaningful assessment of a student's pursuit of excellence. In-depth mastery of a subject is hard, and striving for excellence depends on assessing a student's competency, not just their performance. Where is the space for reflecting on how a student has progressed? Grades might determine who passes the course, but leave no room for a student's trial and error as they grapple with the subject. What about the learning that occurs outside the classroom and talents not captured in grading? The co-curricular experiences that are such an important part of social learning and self-knowledge remain ungraded, which sends the message that these activities are not part of a well-rounded liberal arts education. Plagiarism is harder than ever to detect, especially with AI-generated content complicating authorship. How does an institution put a check on grade inflation, which is known to be rampant and diminishes the very meaning of grades? Professors known as tough graders often hear complaints, prompting grade appeals that sometimes escalate to deans and other administrators. For untenured faculty in particular, evaluations by their students, collected at the end of courses and often used in career advancement decisions, create pressure to award higher grades rather than challenging students. And then there's the psychological toll. Grades don't just measure effort, they shape identity. A student who consistently earns top marks might begin to associate their sense of self-worth with academic performance, feeling pressure to sustain those grades or risk failure. Meanwhile, a student struggling in a single course may internalize that struggle as an indication that they are simply not intelligent enough, when in reality, they may just need a different learning approach. Grades also favor the lucky ones. Students whose parents have college degrees or live in communities offering good schools, or whose family budget supports tutors, receive outside benefits in a system geared to teach them how to get good grades. Grading punishes the unlucky or those who are late developers. Grades cannot measure how far we have come or where we are going. The pressure to perform in this system turns education into a competition rather than an exploration. Instead of fostering intellectual curiosity, grades create a high-stakes environment where the fear of failure overshadows the desire to learn. The result? Students focus less on mastering the subject and more on mastering the system. This isn't learning, it's performance under pressure. Academic grading is simply difficult to defend on its own merits. So then, the question we need to ask is, if grades don't actually help students learn, why do we rely on them so heavily? For more than 50 years, historic New College challenged the fundamental assumption that grades are the best way to assess knowledge and mastery. Instead of grades, the college pioneered an approach that eliminated traditional grading metrics entirely. It was a bold experiment, and it wasn't an arbitrary decision. When New College decided to take this radically different approach, the institution rejected letter grades and replaced them with academic contracts, narrative evaluations, and direct faculty-student collaboration. New College faculty assessed how students solved problems, how they constructed an argument, discerned meaning, persuaded a listener of the plausibility of their view, wrote for clarity and precision, and contributed to a group's success. Instead of receiving an A, a B, or a C, students worked with faculty members each semester to define their academic goals, coursework, and areas for growth. At the end of the term, rather than simply assigning a letter grade, faculty provided detailed evaluations of performance, pinpointing strengths along the way with areas needing further improvement. A failed course never appeared on the student's transcript, but the lessons remained in the narrative evaluation. This approach reshaped the way students engaged with their education. Risk-taking was encouraged. Without the fear of a low grade dragging down a GPA, students felt free to take challenging courses or explore new fields without hesitation. Learning became a conversation. Faculty were no longer just judges assigning scores. They were mentors engaged in ongoing dialogue. Self-direction was essential. Students took responsibility for their education because they were expected to articulate and shape their own goals. With this model, education was no longer about jumping through hoops for an arbitrary letter. It was all about intellectual mastery. Mastery at New College wasn't just about completing coursework. It was about demonstrating true competency through engagement, critical thought, and original contributions to a field of study. Nowhere was this more evident than in the classroom discussions and the senior thesis defense, known as the baccalaureate examination. While lectures and readings were part of the curriculum, the success of a class depended upon how well students could engage in dialogue, challenge ideas, and push discussions forward. This placed an emphasis not just on individual comprehension, but on the collective process of learning, a recognition that understanding deepens when knowledge is tested through discussion, shaped by multiple perspectives and refined through debate. Faculty weren't simply grading responses. They were gauging depth of thought, intellectual flexibility, and the ability to articulate and defend a position. And then came the final academic milestone, the oral defense of the senior thesis. This wasn't just another requirement to check off the list. It was a public event where students presented their original research or creative projects before a faculty panel of 3 or more professors whom they themselves recruited. This presentation wasn't just an endpoint. It was often a launching pad for future work. Some students expanded their theses into graduate research, professional careers, or even publications before they had officially graduated. But what made this model so powerful wasn't just the final demonstration of mastery. It was the culture of academic agency and self-direction that supported it from the start. If a subject wasn't offered in the course catalog, but aligned with their intellectual pursuits, students had the freedom to propose a tutorial or independent study with faculty sponsorship. This meant that learning wasn't confined to pre-existing structures. Rather, it grew dynamically, adapting to the curiosity of each student. When it came time for the senior thesis, students were expected to propose and refine their own topics, conduct meaningful research, and secure faculty sponsorship. A physics major designed a jungle gym for adults to explore biomechanics and movement. Another traveled to Poland and produced a thesis on interwar Polish shtetl communities. An urban studies student investigated the logistical and psychological factors influencing hurricane evacuations from coastal barrier islands. If one faculty member declined to sponsor a project, students explored other options, refining their proposals and learning along the way how to advocate for their ideas. This was more than an academic exercise. It was a process that required students to develop confidence in their intellectual voice, prepare thoughtful arguments, and persuade experts of the value of their work. Through this system, New College didn't just cultivate knowledge. It cultivated scholars, critical thinkers, and innovators, students who didn't just learn from books, but from the very process of shaping their own education. One of the major criticisms of narrative evaluations is that students need grades to graduate for graduate school admissions or job applications. But here's the reality. Many graduate programs prioritize qualitative evaluations and in-depth faculty recommendations over GPA alone. Most employers don't ask for a GPA because they care more about experience, skills, and critical thinking ability. Think about how professional development works beyond college. Employees aren't given letter grades. They receive detailed performance reviews. They receive goal-oriented feedback from mentors and supervisors. Whole industries, from medicine to law and to engineering, rely not on GPA, but on demonstrated expertise and mentorship-based evaluations. If grades aren't necessary to evaluate professionals, why do we insist they're necessary for students? Of course, grades aren't going to disappear from higher education overnight. But the rigid one-size-fits-all model of letter grading is increasingly being challenged by institutions recognizing that genuine mastery requires more than a number on a transcript. Some institutions are experimenting with hybrid models. Contract grading, where students collaborate with professors on defining learning expectations. Specifications grading, which assesses based on demonstrated mastery rather than cumulative points. Pass-fail courses with narrative feedback, allowing students to focus on learning over ranking. And portfolio-based assessments, where students showcase skills and long-term projects rather than rely on cumulative test scores. And even within a graded structure, we can change how we think about student achievement, placing greater emphasis on portfolio-based assessments, faculty mentorship, and individualized evaluations that reflect true mastery. Because ultimately, education is not supposed to be a competition for numbers. New college students understood something that many institutions still struggle with. Excellence isn't about perfection, it's about progress. In 50 years of using narrative evaluations, faculty and students at New College saw firsthand that meaningful assessment fosters meaningful learning. And if assessment doesn't reflect that, then what exactly are we measuring? Thank you.